A very good Sunday morning to my friends from Brumley Baptist Church. Hope that you're doing well. Hope that you're having a good day and a good weekend so far. We are excited to have you with us as we get set to dive further into our study of the book of Colossians. From chapter 2, verse 16 through 23 is going to be our text this morning, and our lesson is going to be the gospel's freedom. The gospel's freedom will be where we spend a few minutes studying together today. We've spent several weeks going through the book of Philippians and now into the book of Colossians, and the gospel has been front and center during this particular time. And so obviously that's a great subject to study and a great subject to immerse ourselves in. Part of why we need to study that specifically for our study of Colossians is because of a group of false teachers who had come in and basically stirred up a lot of trouble for Paul and for the church itself. They were raising questions about who Jesus was. Was he really God? Is he God in the flesh? Can you really trust him? With that sort of thing. That's obviously very problematic. Their second tactic was a little more subtle. They were saying that believers needed to practice certain rules, and if they would do these certain rules or activities, they would get a very secret insider knowledge that only a few people had. Basically likening following Jesus to being part of a super secret cult group. Well, obviously, that's nowhere found in the gospel. The gospel says we are free through Christ. There's no secrets. There's no hidden agendas. There's none of those things. They're simply individuals, brothers and sisters, following Jesus day by day on their walk with him. That's all the Christian life is. There's no secrecy. There's none of those things. And so Paul is trying to fight back against it. And part of how he's fighting back is with this letter, and specifically our theme today, freedom. Freedom. There's a difference between those things that are eternal and those things that are only temporary. Those things are eternal. When you get them in the right perspective, it opens up a great deal of freedom for you as a follower of Christ to know who you are and whose you are, so that you can walk in him in truth and righteousness. Here's our passage. Verses 16 through the end of the chapter in verse 23. If you want to pause for a minute, you can read those right here. Let's look first at freedom in worship. Paul says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink, or in the matter of a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ. In the verses very preceding this, and we have to go back to those because our first word in our passage today is therefore, which you should really never start a lesson or a sermon with, the word therefore. Paul emphasized the freedom that comes from living in Christ's death, his life, his resurrection. Jesus had set the Colossians free from both the consequences of sin and all the rules that Judaism and all the other beliefs of the time had basically restrained them in. The Colossians now were free because of Christ. They didn't need to go back to those things. So he talks about food and drink, a festival or a new moon, Sabbath day, or any of these things. These are all pagan religious symbols. New moon festivals, Sabbath days, do this, do that, get this secret knowledge here. None of those things were real. Those things didn't matter. So he says, don't let anyone judge you according to those things. Those things are just types and shadows, whether they're sacrilegious, being from another belief, or they're actually from the Old Testament. Either way, those things have gone away because Christ has come and he has fulfilled all those things. Christ is the fulfillment of everything the Old Testament has to offer. A shadow is always less important than the body it represents. It's an incomplete, empty copy of something real. Well, the something real in this case is Jesus himself. And the shadow is the Sabbath, the festivals, the Old Testament laws, all the things that he represented that he would come and fulfill in their totality. See, that they didn't need to have to do those things anymore because Jesus had come. So now they had the ultimate freedom in worship, just to worship Jesus as their king. Freedom in worship. They also had freedom from falsehoods. Let no one condemn you by delighting in ascetic practices, the worship of angels, claiming access to a visionary realm. Such people are inflated by empty notions of their unspiritual mind. He doesn't hold on to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and held together by its ligaments and tendons, grows with growth from God. The false teacher's arsenal included self-denial. That's what this ascetic stuff that they were trying to do. Deny yourself, live as a monk, live in a monastery, don't give yourself any earthly pleasure at all, sleep on the floor, fast 5, 6, 7 days in a row. Don't eat, don't drink, don't give yourself any comfort. No, those things don't bring suffering in those ways, don't bring you any closer to the Lord. You have to do those things. You don't get special access to God by being falsely humble. This is a false humility. It's actually a very condescending attitude. Don't worry about these self-denial things. These people were chasing visions instead of chasing Christ himself. They were going after the shadows, the types, the pictures of Jesus instead of after Christ himself. Jesus is the only way. Christ is the only one that they could run to and find their hope in, find their comfort in. A headless faith is a lifeless faith. If you're not connected to the head of the church that he mentions here, that is Christ, then you're not connected to the church. It's a silly notion to even say, but I take my head with me everywhere I go. Why? Because if I don't have a head, it doesn't matter how great a shape my body's in. I've got to have the head to have life. And the same thing is true here. We must have Jesus to have life. The heretics here have created their own rules for holiness, and they were trying now to hold the Colossian Christians to that same standard. And Paul said, no, that is not the standard. That is not the way to do it. That is not what you have been asked to do and to live by. You have freedom from all these falsehoods. Ultimately, you have freedom to live. If you died with Christ to the elements of this world, why do you live as if you still belong to the world? Why do you submit to regulations? Don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. All these regulations refer to what is destined to perish by being used up. They're human commands and doctrines. Although these have a reputation for wisdom by promoting self-made religion, false humility, and severe treatment of the body, they are not of any value in curbing self-indulgence. The phrase, if you died, is probably better translated, since you died. He wasn't asking them if they had been saved. He was saying, since you have been saved, you should be living differently. Don't go back to those false ways of the world. Don't go back to serving the things that are destined to be used up. Christ can never be used up. His grace remains forever and forever and forever. It's everlasting. It is inexhaustible. The false teachers had a reputation for being spiritual leaders, but they didn't have any character as being actual spiritual leaders. Reputation doesn't really matter. It's only what people think about you. Character is what you really are, what God knows you to be. We spend more time worrying about our reputation and not nearly enough time worrying about our character. We're really worried about what people think of us, but not worried about what we actually are. Empty theology, false humility, treatment of the body in very severe ways to try to show how religious you were. This was all foolishness. And Paul said they were freed from all of this foolishness. They were not subject to it anymore, and they should not continue living like they were subject to it. What can we learn today? We can learn, number one, that believers are free to worship God in light of the gospel. The gospel is what gives us access to God, nothing else. We're free to enjoy a relationship with God through Christ. Christ gives us access to God, nothing else. Believers can find freedom through expressing their faith in Christ in all areas of their lives. Christians can be followers of Jesus in every area of their life, and they should be followers of Jesus in every area of their life. That's what it means to be a Christ follower, to lay down your life for him, every nook and cranny, every part of who you are. now belongs to Jesus. That, friends, is when you will truly find freedom. Next week, we move on to chapter 3 of Colossians, the gospel lived out. The gospel lived out. Put on Christ will be our theme next week. And we will do that right here together on Facebook and YouTube. I will remind you, though, this week is exciting at Brumley. We are pulling the curtain back on several new things, I guess, would be the best way to say it. We're continuing our 10 a.m. Sunday morning gathering, our 6 p.m. Wednesday evening gathering, but we're adding back our Sunday night worship gathering at 6 p.m. at Brumley Baptist Church. So Sunday night at 6, we're going through the life of David. I pray that you will join us. Come to Brumley, get out and be with God's people and worship together at 6 p.m. on Sunday night as well this week. Sunday school will continue online until the end of the year, and then we hope to have Sunday school back up and running as well. Thank you for joining me for a few minutes today. Have a good and godly day. Until I see you again, go serve your King.